What you're about to experience isn't just wrestling history, it's the very roots of a sport that still grows today. Through every era of evolution, its foundation has never faded. From its origins in the carnivals to the spotlight of TV, from territorial boundaries to a global legacy, this is Regional Rasslin Presents, where the past steps into the present. And now, your host, Ray Russell.
Hey guys, welcome back to Regional Rasslin Presents, where the past steps into the present. Also, welcome back to the Regional Rasslin Podcast, many weeks later, where we talk the territories. That's right, guys. If you're part of the Patreon, the VIP tier, you can not only see the beautiful face of Phil Adams, who's joining me here in just a moment, but you can listen to us many weeks early here on Regional Rasslin Presents, but dropping for the Regional Rasslin Podcast as well. I am Ray Russell, and as mentioned, Phil Adams joining us this week, which means we dive back into St. Louis wrestling history. And in order to do that, we're going to bring Phil back onto the show right now. Welcome back, Phil.
Well, thanks, Ray. It's really great to be back. It's been a little bit of a break. I had to get back into my history and try to remember what was going on. But yeah, looking forward to it.
Oh, I feel, going back in time, I feel like the fans and the crowd back in the summer anyway of said era gone by, because we have air conditioning and I'm still burning up and trying to get over the heat from outside, heat wave right now, guys. And well, I guess across the entire globe, it feels like anyway, everybody I talk to.
Oh, that's absolutely hitting here in St. Louis. I mean, heat indexes in 105 to 110 every damn day. It's just been miserable. Yeah,
same here in Ohio. So it's just, well, hell hath no fury like a weather scorn or something. I don't really know what we did to deserve this week, but it's hopefully there's a light at the end of the tunnel, guys. But we're here to entertain you, hopefully, and at least inform you. We're going to go back again to the 1950s this week in St. Louis wrestling history. In just a moment, we're going to pull up some notes that we put together. Phil sent me his. I put in some of my own notes and thoughts and et cetera, and we'll discuss and debate. I told Phil, go easy on me, though. I'm still just recovering from the heat outside as we get rolling here. And it's only 11 a.m. in the morning, man. I don't even want to think about this afternoon. But we're going to pull up the notes here.
Yeah, I'm not in much of a debating mood. I'm a little too though it's a little too hot to debate. It's kind of I'm a little more pissy than I am debating.
Oh no! Well, let's try to be cool, literally and figuratively. No, unfortunately, I forgot my glasses, so this is going to be a fun episode to get through. So if you see me enlarge the words, you can understand why, hopefully, out there. We just popped up our notes, though. So last we left off, we were in the latter half of the summer of 1952. We closed out the month of August, moving into the month of September. And starting in September, thanks to you, Phil, you realized that general admission is a rise. It's on the rise from 60 cents to 75 cents. 3/4.
It's amazing. Yeah, inflation is just killing us all. 75 cents to get into the building. It's horrible.
My goodness. Well, that's a hell of a jump, though, I guess, in 52 standards, 15-cent increase there at the general admission. But maybe the action will be worth it. We'll have to wait and see. So the shows will start back up. Remember, we take the summers off. They've learned their lesson. I also had, I think it was David Taub reach out to me, and he mentioned that it could have been something to do with Sam not wanting to interfere with or compete with the St. Louis Cardinals at the time.
Well, both the St. Louis Cardinals and the St. Louis Browns were still here as well. So you had two baseball teams competing. St. Louis Browns weren't very successful, so they didn't get the crowds that the Cardinals got. But there were still two things going on in the summer. But I just think that if Sam would have drawn good crowds in the summer, he would have gone up against the Cardinals and the Browns regardless. I just think maybe just too many things to do. I don't know. It's a strange tradition.
Yeah, it is kind of odd. I mean, obviously, it goes back to business, like you mentioned, because me and Rick Fields, we're covering 1950s right now in Georgia, and they're running weekly. Basically, they're in the summer months. So they're doing okay in the Georgia territory versus St. Louis. So I guess it really just depends where you're at and how hot the crowds are for professional wrestling. But hey, how can they miss you if you don't go away? We go away for the summer. We come back And here they are, September the 18th, with the first local appearance of Pat O'Connor. He's going to headline here. Lots of hype for his appearance in the local press. And the show's going to draw 1,800 fans. Or 9,018 fans, sorry. That zero screwed me up. Pat O'Connor over the Mighty Atlas.
Yeah, Pat got a lot of press in the local papers coming in. For some reason, they really had built him up as being a very special wrestler and somebody who obviously they were going to spend a lot of time on and promoting.
Well, Pat O'Connor, not the only new talent to the territory. Another name who arrived September the 18th, Hans Hermann, the evil German, the main event monster heel, Hans Hermann. Look at this push as he just begins with the company. Destroys Al Lovelock in 41 seconds. Destroys a young Freddie Blassie in 1 minute and 7 seconds. Defeats Wild Bill Longson, the next man up underneath the main event, or sometimes the main event himself is Longson. And then from there, it's Hermann over Don Leo Jonathan, the Mormon Giant. That match only goes 6.5 minutes. And he's got a team with Kowalski is Hans Hermann against O'Connor and Watson in the main event, which all sets up Hermann a big match with the NWA World Champion Lou Thesz. Talk about a push, man.
Yeah, it's kind of funky in that I looked into the future with Hans Hermann. I believe that match with Kowalski was the last time that he was on the winning side of a match in St. Louis. It's really strange. Every other match from there on, I may have missed one, but every other match from there on, he was always on the losing side or in a draw or actually taking the fall in a singles match.
It is really peculiar where they build him basically the jetpack on his back to get him to Lou Thesz, essentially. And then it's like, okay, as my grandma used to say, the newness wore off of Hermann, or maybe he upset somebody in the locker room. I'm not really sure what supposedly happened there, but maybe he wasn't drawing what they wanted him to, but I don't know if that's the issue either. They're not going to move away from this German gimmick, though. They're going to continue to pursue finding the right German here.
Yeah, you definitely need a German in the 50s. It's very important, I think, for all wrestling territories at the time.
Well, September 26th also marks the first appearance of Baron Leone in St. Louis, who will draw 63.78. Next show with him, headlining October the 10th, draws only 44.50. And Leone got to get some wins over Whipper Watson and Frankie Talabar. So again, another big name from the West Coast. We know what Leone could do out there. He's set some records, or will be setting records, and he is here now in the St. Louis territory and scoring some victories early on. But it doesn't look like the name alone is the big draw here.
No, I'm guessing that they were probably pretty disappointed in his drawing ability here in St. Louis. I think we had in the last show we had looked at his appearance. I think. Maybe in August or July in an outdoor show that didn't draw very well either. And he was just coming off that huge, $100,000 gate with Lou Thesz, supposedly.
They drew well.
Yeah. And, but in St. Louis, for whatever reason, he was not the draw. Maybe the style of wrestling, maybe the gimmick, who knows? It just didn't work.
Yeah, that's the one thing that we always have to take into account, and that'll go on for decades. A wrestler can be over in one. Look at Bruno Sammartino. I don't know if there's a bigger name than Bruno that was over in Toronto, certainly over in the New York markets and on Boston, Philly, etc. But you plug Bruno in pretty much any other territory, and he was just another guy on the card. And I'm not trying to knock Bruno. That's just how the fans perceived him, it felt like.
Yeah, it's especially strange here in St. Louis because we have it's a huge Italian population, especially back when Bruno was hitting the main events here, and he was always under par for drawing in the main events.
Yeah, it's just really peculiar. You never know who's going to draw, who doesn't, but you can't see what sticks against the wall unless you throw it there to begin with. And that's what they do with Hans Hermann. That's what they do with Baron Leone. So they're trying here, certainly trying here, the 1950s. So we move ahead to October the 24th. On a Sam Muchnick show. They're all Sam shows, kayfabe, brother. Vern Gagne comes in from the Dumont Network, draws 87.55, but afterwards, the Athletic Commission says it will have to consider whether to ban Vern's sleeper hold. And this is going to be a thing for decades to come. Vern Gagne, the patented legendary sleeper hold. Me and Roman Gomez just covered an episode in 1985 where Greg Gagne is doing the Gagne sleeper, and they're still warning kids not to try this at home.
Oh no, you could kill a man with the sleeper. It was funny. This controversy started back in the spring of this year with the sleeper. I think in a legit way that the athletic commissioner in St. Louis actually had been talked into the fact that the sleeper was a potentially fatal hold, right. and that Vern Gagne was on the precipice of killing people if he left it on there too long. And so they actually had hearings on it, and eventually, the commission relented and allowed him to use it, but they were going to always keep a close eye on it. It even got to the point where there were columns written in the St. Louis paper, basically telling the athletic commissioner, this hold has been around for a long time. Jim Londos was using it in St. Louis in the 1930s. Right. It was just called something different back then, but it's not a fatal. It's not going to kill you. But the commission, they were going to do their job. Damn it.
Damn it, indeed. I think I mentioned this to Jamie on a recent episode, somewhere, but I said, you put the sleeper hold on right, you're knocking the guy out with the carotid, but if you put it on wrong, you're choking the guy out. So you can kill a man two different ways. So, I mean, right. It is a dangerous hold, and, Vern talks about how they, they implemented that in the Los Angeles area, the police did, and they had to pull it away because they killed X amount of, people they were trying to pursue and apprehend, and et cetera, and so... accidental murder, I suppose, is what it is. So,
well, I remember from my AWA fandom days that when Nick Bockwinkel went to Singapore to learn a new style of sleeper called the Singapore sleeper, but that one that one was a choke, as it turned out. Yeah. It wasn't the pure sleeper that Vern was using.
There's a lot of nonsense going on right now on the internet of who knows and doesn't know the man named Nick Bockwinkel, but I'll leave that there. Right. It's all over my Twitter feed. I don't know what that's about, but
Paul Hauser kind of stepped in at that thing.
He's an interesting character, but Vern Gagne, we talked about the sleeper, and they're going to debate that for decades to come, at least 3+ decades to come, at least until he doesn't have a company anymore. But here back in October. It's Vern Gagne over Hans Schmidt, and what I called a huge historical matchup from everything I could gather. It was a very big deal. Hans Schmidt, another evil German, kind of replacing Hans Hermann in a way, or they're already looking to replace Hans Hermann. I don't know how you want to look at it. There can only be so many Germans in the territory at one given time, right? It's unfortunate. Talk about later, Tony Atlas said, they only wanted one black guy they could push at a time in the territory, so if Dog came in, you knew you were screwed, or if so-and-so came in, you knew you were screwed. And I mean, we would see German tag teams, but I have to imagine that this is similar here. You can only have a couple Germans at a time. Otherwise, it's just monotonous, the German gimmick rolling out match after match.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much true of all ethnic gimmicks. I mean, you saw that with the Japanese wrestlers for the most part, unless of course we're dealing with tag teams. But it's pretty much ethnic guys are always kept one to a territory. Makes them special, I guess.
Lucky for Ivan Putski, there weren't so many guys doing the Polish gimmick, so it worked out for him. But so Vern Gagne over Hans Schmidt. Match goes 25 minutes. Vern Gagne is already becoming a major figure in professional wrestling thanks to the invention of the television set.
Yeah, Vern was huge on the Dumont network. Probably the first national star in some respects.
Big babyface star, they say. Gorgeous George sold all the TV sets, but Vern Gagne was the beloved babyface. So I think he was already going bald even way back then. But the cards becoming more compact, more violent, and I think it really plays into the whole TV thing. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But one subtle but very important change, the length of the matches we're seeing here beginning to get a little shorter than they were before. A lot of marathon matches, 60-minute matches. I've been looking at the results. There's a lot more crash, boom, bang kind of deal now. Let's get in, let's get out, let's tell the story, let's leave the crowd up here and go to the next match. So in the early 1950 time frame, it was constant 30-minute draws. We talked about in the angle they've been doing with the wrestling the two guys, but now we're seeing squash-like matches begin to appear. Dominant heel wins. We talked about Hans Hermann. Quicker attraction pacing in the ring. They realize this is an attraction gimmick. He can't go 60 minutes, so we get him in and we get him out. Now, many have credited television wrestling as the influence in the change in booking strategies, if you will, here in the 1950s. Promoters all around are learning audiences react to the explosive dominance of a wrestler, the big high spot comeback, the big drop kick, if you will. Characters matter now. It's not just the best scientific wrestler getting the job done now. And I'm not saying there weren't characters before this, but now we can show them off on the TV set.
Right, and with the TV set, I mean, it's more important to be more theatrical in your presentation.
Very good.
It's not looked at necessarily as purely an athletic contest. Sports in general, I think, we're adding more and more showmanship into sports across the spectrum, and wrestling is just certainly a part of that trend.
Well, most importantly, overall development, without question, 1952 feels like the birth almost of the modern heel monster. And at least in St. Louis, we're starting to get some of those guys in there and characters in here as well, which would actually contradict what Sam would tell us later on, what he stood for and St. Louis wrestling stood for. But he's throwing things against the wall. What do I want to be? What, as a promoter, what do I want to be? We tried it this way. Let's try it that way. And we're going to eventually settle in on what we know St. Louis will be when they get full-time TV. But we're going to talk about TV here today in just a little bit. But you look at the names, the Germans, Hans Hermann, Hans Schmidt, Tarzan Kowalski, you get the gimmick names, the Mighty Atlas, Ivan Rasputin is here. So the promotion clearly learning dominant villains create emotional money draw power, those babyface comeback. I'm not saying it never happened before, but now with the invention of the television, you're not just entertaining the couple thousand fans in the arena. Now you're potentially entertaining, I don't know how many people were watching the TV sets in the 1950s, but let's just say millions for the hell of it. And again, like you said, more theatrical. Tell your story. More of an explosive comeback. Not just a cradle and a pinfall. Throw a couple drop kicks in there, or make the heel look foolish. So they're certainly learning a lot here in the 50s.
Right, and again, wrestling is competing on television with other entertainment, and a sitcom back in the 1950s wasn't slow moving. There was things happening, bop, 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 bop. And wrestling had to keep up with what was happening on television if people were going to continue to watch it.
There were unique baby faces, Antonino Rocca, Ricky Starr, various gimmicks as well. But with all of the heel gimmicks, the Japanese, the Germans, the monsters, etc., you were still able to get those clean-cut baby faces like a Pat O'Connor or Vern Gagne who could work, tremendously in the ring, technically, or whatever they needed to do. So you were still able to keep that part. Your good guys were typically more, again, clean-cut. So we were going to get more of the wrestling style from the baby faces. Let the heels do the shtick.
Right, and there had to be a conflict created. You needed to create that conflict by having the outrageous, outsized villain to really capture the imagination of everybody. And also, you see all these monster heel types coming in. Right. It's kind of endemic with wrestling at the time. With the monster heels are just starting throughout all of wrestling. And I think at the beginning of any sort of trend, there's always going to be a lot of overkill. And so that's why I think you see all these guys now, and then it kind of they filter out after a while. Yeah, we will see that come to be as time goes on. But it's like you said, when we're trying something new, it's balls to the wall. It's let's see what works, what doesn't, and we got 20 gimmicks. They may whittle it down to 2 gimmicks at some point, but it all starts somewhere, and you got to kind of try to figure it out. It's kind of like steroids in the wrestling business, right? Billy Graham walked so these guys later on could run. It's like Billy used to say, we didn't even know how much to take. We were just, injecting ourselves. So later on, we would learn there were cycles and et cetera. There were no such thing as cycles. Graham just took a needle and went to town. I mean, it worked for a while anyway, and that's a completely different explanation as to what trends are going on in the wrestling world, but we're predating the steroid world at the moment here in the 1950s. But it's just another thing, though. It's one guy's trying it out, and then we'll figure it out later. But it takes somebody to begin things. And here in St. Louis, this is the time period, the early 1950s. The TV era is now upon us. But Pat O'Connor, quietly, or maybe not so quietly, unquestionably being groomed as a future, I'll call it world title level star. We won't say world champion. I don't know when they made that decision, but clearly they see they have something here in the New Zealander, Pat O'Connor. Yep, they sure did. And obviously Pat O'Connor becomes a total fixture here in St. Louis, but he had TV exposure before coming to St. Louis. He had built up a little bit of a name. Certainly he wasn't coming in as a as a complete unknown to St. Louis.
Right.
But he really, I think he ended up pretty much living here throughout the rest of his life. I met him one time, gosh, it must have been like 1985, 1986 on St. Patrick's Day at a bar in St. Louis. I can assure you, Pat would, if he were still alive, he would not remember that occasion at all.
I would imagine. I've heard some things about Pat O'Connor and the bars, so to speak. But yeah, I believe Pat, I know he becomes, throws some money in here. He's going to be part of the St. Louis territory, and the Kansas City is going to be around this whole entire area for years to come, not just as world champion, but moving forward. And then I know there's a hiccup somewhere in his life where he heads back to New Zealand to avoid maybe paying some taxes here. I've heard this story, but
yeah, I think there was some sort of issue, but he came back.
Well, they all come back. Saito came back, right? I think they told Saito to hit the deck, when he was released from prison. And I don't know how they worked it out, but I had rumors, obviously, that they said, you're not allowed, we're not permitted back here to work at the very least. And we know Saito will be back as late as 95 in WCW. Right. So, well, speaking of foreign guys, the gimmick foreigner, Hans Hermann, I don't know that he was actually German or not. I didn't do any digging on this guy.
No, he wasn't. He was, I think, from Massachusetts.
Massachusetts. Well, that doesn't mean his ancestors weren't German.
I'm pretty sure the last name, because I was just doing some research on this morning. I'm pretty sure he was. It was not a very Germanic last name.
Maybe he was adopted. I'm debating you, Phil.
Maybe he was just a late adherent to Nazism. Who knows?
Well, Hans Hermann, for like you mentioned, now it's not going to last very long, but he's going to become the territory's top monster heel attraction. Briefly, they're building him up for a world title shot with Thesz himself, and so we're going to see what happens with Hans Hermann here by the end of the year. While Bill Longson, who has his points in the territory, I think it was 35% of the territory. Longson has had one great resurgence here. He kind of, I don't know whether by choice or whatever the situation is, but we saw Longson kind of, I don't want to say go away, but move down the card. And obviously having 35%, you have to agree to move down the card a little bit. But Longson in recent months here, since the return, the fall of 52, it looks like they're going for the resurgence of Bill Longson, at least for the short term. So it almost feels like now he's just that credible legend guy that we're working into the main events and semi-mains.
Yeah, and that was a very good role for him. He would basically, in some respects, the Chief J Strongbow role in front of Bruno. Yeah, he was a guy you had to get through in order to be a legitimate contender.
Perfect analogy.
And in order to make him, that guy, they have to give him some wins and build him back up. He just can't be the old veteran who never wins.
Right. I would love to have seen Bill Longson do the war dance. That would have been interesting. But that's another story for another day.
He did a hell of a Piledriver.
He did. I've seen just a little bit of footage that's out there of him. He was a tough dude. He had to be back in this era to make it anyway.
Oh, definitely.
Well, we continue on to the final couple months in 1952, November, December, go to November 21st. Thesz versus Hans Hermann. It feels like the champion versus the evil foreign menace. Thesz defeating the evil foreigner Hans Hermann. Match only goes 14 minutes, 40 seconds. So very different from these sports style matches we've seen with Vern Gagne here recently, or Thesz when he decides to come through. And this is 14 minutes in and out. And so we see Hans Hermann the build. His longest match on record is 6.5 minutes with Don Leo Jonathan. Singles match, 6.5 minutes. He's working the world champion. Thesz can work anybody for 60. Even Ricky Dozon, though, after their first match, he told Ricky, maybe we're better off going about 30 because he realized what he had to work with there. But he didn't want to expose Ricky. He wanted to keep making money with Ricky over there in Japan. But here with Hans, they do half that. Half of 30, they do about 15. So something tells me Hans Hermann wasn't the greatest worker in the ring.
No, probably not. And the newspaper account of that match was basically that Hans Hermann came out very aggressive. And so I think that was kind of the story of the match, that his aggression was used against him. And coming out in that aggressive manner, you can create the fiction that he'd burned himself out, and that way you didn't have to have the 30-minute match.
Right. No, absolutely. And so he put a lot behind those stomps, I'm sure. And so we already touched on it, and you referenced him kind of as the Chief J Strongbow rules. So, but I'm going to go back over my notes here in case there's something in here people can use. Longson, Bill Longson, his late 52 booking is fascinating. If you compare it to the beginning of 1952, even something over the summer here, they decide we're going to have a reaffirmation of Longson's greatness. Remember Bill Longson back in the heyday when he was on top? Well, he's still right there. He's not as good as he once was, but he's as good once as he ever was. And here he defeats Hans Herman as well before the end of the year. Then he teams and successfully defeats Herman and Kowalski together, which is huge because Herman had just been positioned as nearly unstoppable. So you talk about after the Thesz match, especially, Herman really doesn't get any victories. But the fans, they've only seen him lose to Thesz, perhaps, or know that he lost to Thesz if it was in the papers or whatever the case may be. So it still means something because you're beating him now on the way down, on his way out.
Right. And you're beating him at this point, you're still beating him with your top stars.
Right. It restores his prestige. It reminds you of who he is.
Right. Which is very important. You know, Longson loses a few matches. People think, well, maybe the old guy doesn't have it anymore. But apparently he still does.
Stella got his groove back. Longson got his groove back. That's what. By the end of 1952, Longson feels more like the legendary veteran attraction who occasionally reminds everyone he can still beat anybody on that given night. That's an incredibly graceful transition and very rare in the wrestling history when you own 35% of a territory. Now, Baba owned All Japan, but so did the TV company. And they told Baba by the 1980s, you got to pull yourself out of the main events. You're starting to show your age. Your size is working against you. It's time for Jumbo to get the big push. And that's just one particular situation. There's been plenty of that we've seen over the time. Guys refusing to step down. Maybe Dick the Bruiser refusing to step down. Maybe the Sheik refusing to put somebody over at some point, at any point. And that kind of kills territories as well. But Longson here, much like Wilbur Snyder, we talked about this in the past in Indianapolis and specifically Chicago with Richard Vicek. Wilbur Snyder was not only a point holder in the territory, but he was willing to do whatever it took. He was a businessman, a company man. Right.
And with Longson here in wrestling, we hadn't had the history of the aging star who was a part owner of a company. And so Longson, in this situation, he's kind of being treated like a actual professional athlete who is winding down his career, kind of like, say he's an outfielder for the Cardinals. Well, he's not starting every game. He's playing 120 games, maybe not hitting against the toughest of the left-handers, but he's coming in there and he still has ability, and he's still being treated as a person who can contribute.
There's a lot of realism to that.
Right. And we didn't have the, at that point in wrestling, we hadn't had the example of the aging star who just wouldn't go away.
Right.
And so Longson, I think, is really being treated like a real athlete.
Most territories later on, especially in the 1970s, we would see these guys age out, and they just wanted to either be there, hang around the boys, or collect a paycheck and not have to do any quote-unquote shoot jobs. And so they would be relegated to television job guys, preliminary, matches, just to still be with the companies. We would see they once upon a time legends, even if it was for one territory. We would see guys, later on. I remember watching Mike Padusis in New York, but so many names that were once something somewhere, and they just kind of falter. And happened a lot in Florida as well. I know me and Bob Roop went over numerous names that were one time on top. And when Bob was going through there, because he was new to the pro wrestling business, he was sitting there going over these guys who had been legendary figures. And at the time, he really didn't even realize the magnitude of some of the guys they were putting him over on TV who had once been something. But by that point, they were quote unquote useless as far as the promotion was concerned. And so you want a paycheck, come in, do a 9-minute job on TV, and maybe we'll factor you into a couple of spot shows this week. So it's unfortunate, but Longson not only being a top draw, but also being part promoter, part owner, they're going to take care of him here. And that's what they do. They make him look good. But a guy who is on the rise still here in the 1950s, talking about Władek Kowalski, Killer Kowalski, you guys know him better, is still an absolute workhorse and monster. It's hard to find a combination like that. A guy that looks like Kowalski, especially here in the 50s, the pre-vegetarian Killer Kowalski, if you guys ever seen him, huge, massive muscle and a monster, but boy, could he go in the ring. We've talked about all the 60-minute matches he's already done. His consistency here from the 1950 timeframe to 1952, just absolutely incredible. He's becoming the 60-minute man. Eat your heart out, Nate. Woo! Killer Kowalski. What have you gotten out of Kowalski so far just in this last couple-year run off and on with St. Louis?
It's just his amazing consistency. He's always at the top, and he's always in long matches. You know, he had that program with Whipper Watson. Yep. Of course, he's been had that program with Thesz. He's always on top. He must have been an incredible performer at that time. Probably nonstop action, just based on his usage. I would kind of argue he may have been like the second biggest star in St. Louis at this time.
I could see why. They're certainly given plenty enough time to shine in the ring here. Look at November 14th, handicap match, as they call it here. We call it the endurance match, or at least I do, because you beat one guy, you got to go on to wrestle another one immediately thereafter is Kowalski. And he goes 37 minutes with Bob Orton Sr., that's the grandfather of Randy Orton and the father of Bob Orton Jr., Daddy. And so he goes 37 minutes with Bob Orton, defeats him, then goes to a 1 hour draw immediately thereafter with Bill Melby. So over 90 minutes in the ring there for the killer, or the future killer, on November the 14th.
Yeah, and that's I think that's considered a loss in the way the handicap rules in St. Louis were, because in order to win, you had to defeat both men,
both guys, right?
You couldn't have a loss or a draw. And if in some of these quote unquote handicap matches, the guy would lose the first fall. The non-handicapped guy would lose the first fall, and the match would be over. The second guy never even had to get in the ring.
That's like, when I grew up, I remember my dad, who grew up in the Johnny Powers era, didn't really watch wrestling in my era, but every once in a while there'd be a 2 out of 3 fall match in the Crockett world or something. And if he was walking through, he would say, "Isn't there always 3 falls?" And that's kind of like, the old folklore. We know we've got plenty of 2 straight fall matches, but it did always feel that way. We were going to go to the 3rd fall, but if to add a little realism to it, sometimes you got to do things like that. It was supposed to be the handicap matches, they call it here, 2 matches, but sometimes you didn't get past the first guy, as you pointed out. But Kowalski, you mentioned consistency on top, but how about consistency and protected as a heel on top, which is unusual for a heel to be in a company off and on for the better part of 3 years now, and he's remained protected most of the time.
Right. Yeah, always on top, and he's always against top stars. And if he's not against a top star, he gets a very quick win.
Kowalski, though, he's going to be a big name in the world of the professional wrestling, believe it or not, guys. We'll talk more about him later on. Vern Gagne is a guy we can continue to talk about as well. He continues to build the elite level identity on the television screen, but Vern wise enough to know, I got to move out. Rick Fields, we've been covering that in Georgia. We're going to see a lot of repeat names here in St. Louis that we're covering in Georgia. These guys are spreading out. They're getting their name out there. And some of these guys who are learning the different fan bases and the different styles in the ring and what people want, they're the ones that you're going to see become superstars, for lack of a better term, moving forward. They're going to be the names we all know and remember because they're making the trips right now. And Vern Gagne is right at the top of that list. Not only is he huge on TV, he knows my pictures on the TV screen. It's kind of like cable later, right? Everybody has the potential to see me. So why not go and make some money in Chicago, but also St. Louis or Atlanta or wherever the case may be?
Right. And really, at that time, we didn't have necessarily the defined small territories that we would evolve into. And so wrestling was a little bit more national, and Vern would almost be expected as a national star, as a TV star, to appear in some of the larger cities.
Well, look at this. Let's talk about names that would go on to become big-time stars. Only 3 years into the business, we get an early look here. November the 28th, a youngster, believe it or not, by the name of Reggie Lasowski, who will go on later to become the Crusher, the man who made Milwaukee famous. They even have a statue of him out there.
They do.
The Crusher, though. But here he was just little Reggie Lasowski. I don't know if he's ever little, but doing the job here to Fred Von Schacht.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with Fred Von Schacht. But Reggie Lasowski, I'm pretty sure, was never little, because I've seen tapes of him in the 50s, and he looked pretty much he was a fully developed individual at that point.
That'll teach everybody to go out there and pick up a 12-pack today, guys. I plan to after this recording as well. As the The trusted hand, Ray Stern, quietly gets a push kind of in the mid-card here. So they would throw a bone to the guys that were tried and true. They showed up. They weren't trouble in the locker room. They pretty much were a company guy. They didn't complain. They did jobs if you asked them to. And Ray Stern was kind of that guy here in St. Louis around this time period. But they're going to give him some wins, throw him some bones. Defeats Al Lovelock. Johnny Costas draws with, what do I got? Beetleman? I don't even know. I didn't even write the guy's first name. So that was.
It'd probably be Don Beetleman, who became Don Curtis.
Oh, that's right. This is a real name, right?
Yep. Yeah, from Buffalo.
Okay. Yeah. Don Curtis would eventually go down to Florida as well. So that's it's fun to see some of these guys, though, that were up and comers at the time, as Gorilla Monsoon liked to refer, the youngsters, putting a lot of time in the gym. The cards, when you look at them, they're a little different than they were in the 1940s. Even going into the new decade of the 50s, it feels more balanced because now you got the NWA World title, but you also have these gimmicky monster guys, the foreigners, the legendary veterans like Longson, mid-card style matches. So you get your technical matches, but they're also beginning to introduce 6-man tag team matches here in St. Louis. We've seen some results of those and the famous Australian tag team matches.
Yeah, wrestling is evolving into more entertainment based on its television exposure, and St. Louis is just going along with the evolution right now.
Taking advantage of that carny style as it begins, because we see the big jacked up powerhouse type guys, the mighty midgets, are rolling through town. We got the ethnic gimmicks. We talked about a lot of those already, especially the Germans. So it's just a hell of a mix in between. You got a little bit of everything. It's like they said, it's like the circus, a little bit of everything for everyone.
Except we refuse to use women in St. Louis at this point. Can't have a woman on the card. That's very unseemly. That's
very peculiar, but it's not unusual for the time period. That's for sure. We know that would happen in a lot of areas, unfortunately. But it's the mix. It's a hell of a bag, but like you said, the ladies are being left out at the moment. So shows are basically weekly here from September 18th through December 26th. The crowds ranging anywhere from 4,400 to over 9,000 fans. So it's a hodgepodge of who the crowd they're drawing, depending on what else is going on. And maybe the lack of a main event could be the case as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the issue is, but there are a lot of small crowds in this period of time. And it seems to, at least in the early part of the 50s, the fall crowds seem to be a little bit less than the spring crowds were, or the winter crowds.
Right. Yeah, I noticed that too. It's very unusual. I'm curious to get into more insight. Maybe we'll have to do a little more digging and try to see if we can come up with a reason behind that. I'll have to talk to Herb Simmons as well, see if that was an issue later on when we get to the actual TV era. But here's an interesting deal, and these notes are straight from Phil, guys. I wouldn't have these without Phil. On December 21st, an article put out that Chris Zaharias is suing Al Lovelock for injuries from an accident on August the 6th, way back in August, while traveling from Memphis to St. Louis. Chris alleged that he was a paying passenger in Al's vehicle when Al failed to slow at a curve and flipped the car. Boy, people were lawsuits even back in the 1950s, huh?
Well, it's a wrestler lawsuit, so
it is a wrestler lawsuit.
there's probably some carny involved in this, but Chris alleged in the lawsuit that he was injured his back and he was never be able to wrestle again, and he was looking for compensation for that. Apparently, he must have been riding with Al, probably paying him his nickel a mile, whatever the trans was back in the day, and Al was probably not paying attention. Who knows? Maybe they're passing a couple of beers back and forth and missed a turn, flipped the car, and Chris was out of wrestling for a bit.
He was indeed out of. He was still waiting for the judge to come back with the rendering, and I feel like it didn't work in Chris's favor because, spoiler alert.
Yeah.
It's a miracle. Chris Zaharias will indeed wrestle again one day. We'll talk about that later.
Modern medicine, making those improvements in the early 50s, he was somehow able to come back from this and get back in the ring.
Relive the glory days of Memphis wrestling with the Retro Wrestling Review USWA podcast. Each week, we go back in time to review USWA Championship Wrestling from the 1990s, episode by episode. Join us for watch-alongs, behind-the-scenes stories, and exclusive interviews with people who were there and lived it. Whether you grew up watching it or you're discovering it for the first time, this podcast is your ringside seat to Memphis wrestling history. It's all a part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Listen now at uswapodcast.com.
Hey guys, Ray Russell back to talk to you about all the new and exciting audio and video podcasts we've been putting together over at patreon.com/WrestleCopia. As a self-funded brand, this entire ship is powered by our patrons. It's your support that keeps all of these wonderful shows going here at WrestleCopia. And with that said, I wanted to mention that we now have 3 major tiers with tons of Patreon-exclusive next-level content for our Patreon supporters. And it all starts with the $5 all-access tier, which gets you early access to many of the weekly podcasts, at least a dozen monthly digital downloads for your viewing and reading pleasure, the insanely detailed show notes for the Wrestling Memory Grenade Regional Rasslin, and the OG Monday Warfare podcast, plus random bonus video drops, archived old-school audio watch-alongs from the early years of the brand. And if that's not all, the brand new Patreon-exclusive podcast, Ranting Raw, featuring yours truly, Ray Russell, completely uncensored, unfiltered, with honest takes, taking patron questions and addressing various topics from throughout wrestling history. It is a whole lot of fun wrapped under the all-access tier for only $5, but things get even hotter with the VIP Superfan tier. For just a few dollars more, you get everything already mentioned in the all-access tier. Plus, as part of the VIP tier, a whole new slew of videocast series where it's not just your typical watch-alongs. Sure, we laugh, we have fun, but we're also breaking down the history, the context, and the why behind what you're seeing. And as part of the VIP tier, you have access to Dan Gennety's Puro Resu Academy videocast, the Coliseum videocast with co-host Gene Jackson, and the Monday Warfare videocast, Raw vs. Nitro, breaking down the history of the Monday Night War. Plus, you also get the Memphis 1985 folder of goodies and all show notes for the Puro Academy podcast and Gene's retro review show. Lots to be had there at the VIP tier. But wait, there's more. For those WrestleCopia backers who crave even more from the brand, we bring you yet another level of content fit for a warrior. Because it is indeed the ultimate tier, which gives you everything from the all-access pass, everything from the VIP tier, plus you will receive access to the big ones video series featuring a lengthy look and discussion into some of the biggest pay-per-views, super shows, and other events from throughout wrestling history. It's also a great place to keep up with the big events that coincide with the Monday Warfare videocast and so many other big events from years gone by. You'll also have access to the newest big hit to the Copia brand. I'm talking about Regional Rasslin Unreal, the video series. Get ready for the next level in Regional Rasslin as we dissect territory history in video form. Watch along with us. But still, even more for your money, guys. You'll also receive access to the Treasure Chest, which offers patrons the unique opportunity to download and watch select rarities from wrestling history. And for those of you who are wondering what we offer, are contemplating joining a paid Patreon membership, or simply a curious lurker, a reminder there's a free tier at our Patreon that you can join as well. Remember guys, no subscription, cancel any time, but I think you'll like the content that we're offering there for any budget you may have. And you can sign up right now, patreon.com/WrestleCopia, or look for the QR code where available. We appreciate your support in helping us pay the bills to keep the WrestleCopia Podcast Network running and enabling us to continue to bring you all the quality programming that we offer.
Hey, it's Bob Smith, and guess what? The Outdated Wrestling Hour is now part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. But hey, no fear, you're still going to hear the unique guests, comedy, music, authors, journalists, funny people. Who knows who's going to end up on the Outdated Wrestling Hour? Remember, it's all new and all old. So check it out. from the WrestleCopia Podcast Network and wherever you get your podcasts. Listen if you know what's good for you.
Well, you got here also in your notes, Phil, that wrestling in St. Louis for 1952 drew 215,405 paying fans and 29 shows, making $263,929 in today's money. That's nearly $3.3 million in today's dollars. Yeah,
pretty astounding. You look at the numbers from the times. $263,000 they drew. Wow, that's what one good gate today. But now for the time, they drew $3 million between the two promotions, and you just had to think that they're basically rolling in money at this point.
To put it a different way, too, I mean, like later on, in inflation by the 1980s, but I remember hearing like in the early 80s, Georgia maybe, or I think it was the Georgia territory, somebody drew around $2 million, and they made it sound like it was just an amazing amount of money, for the year. And and obviously that's with inflation going into the 1980s. But back here, you're talking 263,000 in the early 1950s. That's nothing to turn away from. I mean, that's some good money. I mean, coming in right here, and they've certainly found a niche, and we're going to see what they do with the gimmicks and then some of the other things here as we move into the new year of 1953. Begins with the first card on January the 9th, but it is not Sam Muchnick running this show. It is the Mississippi Valley Sports Club side of things. But the first 6 shows here you have noted in 1953 draw in the 6,000 range, except January the 30th, a Sam Muchnick card drawing 10,480 for Thesz versus Bill Longson. The people want to see their hero come after the world champion here. 2 very well-known talents in the St. Louis territory, but wow, I almost thought that was a typo. 10,000 fans. Yeah, and they had an interesting card, a 2 out of 3 fall midget match on there as well. But yeah, 24 minutes with Thesz and Bill Longson, and it didn't have a clean finish. So it looks like Bill Longson somehow got himself disqualified, building for perhaps a future matchup. But going back to what you were saying previously, it shows how well that they had built Bill Longson back up to make him not only a legitimate challenger, but a challenger who totally sold out the Kiel Auditorium. Clearly, the fans believed there was a chance there. There must have been a hell of a promo or a hell of a press going around for this big event, because the fans bought in, and you're absolutely right. Basically, a sellout there at the Kiel. But we look at we talked about 6,000, roughly around 6,000 fans for some of the other shows. So as we scroll ahead, I'm just going to look at the main events here, see what was pulling in the lesser crowds, the 6,000. We got Kowalski defeating Whipper Watson, rekindling their issues from the past by disqualification. We have Vern Gagne over the Mighty Atlas. That would have been fun for Vern to work the Mighty Atlas. Whipper Watson coming back with Kowalski too, scoring a victory over Kowalski in the main event here. But look at the times on these Kowalski and Watson matches, only about 13, 14 minutes. Yeah, they're short matches. In fact, you look at that entire card for the January 23rd, all of them are relatively short matches, just the opening match draw, but the rest are, there's a 12-minute match, a minute match, 17, 14. Interesting. Well, we talked about Germans, and here's another one here at the top of the card here, January the 23rd, the opener, Karl Krauser, pronounce it how you choose, taking on Tarzan White, another guy we talked about recently in Georgia. But it's fun to see that they're still continuing to roll out the gimmicks. The great Zora has arrived. We'll talk about him in a little bit. Lucky Siminovich, who did a lot of the early Japanese tours I covered with Dan Gennity. It was cool to see his name coming through town here, doing a job to the great Zora. Bill Longson prepping for that January 30th card by working and scoring a victory over Bob Orton Sr., Daddy, on January the 23rd. So watching the build for some of these guys, show to show, it makes sense. It's a good storytelling 101, basically. But you're right. You look at the results for the entire January 23rd card. There's not a match that goes over 20 minutes. And in today's world, that's very common. But back in this time period, especially in like St. Louis, we were accustomed to seeing some of the longer matches. And I have to feel like there's certainly a method behind the madness here. Like, we need shorter matches. That's what's getting over on the TV set.
Yeah, and also, if every match is 30 minutes, then people are accustomed to thinking every match is going to be 30 minutes. So you have to change things up. And if you want to continue to present it as an athletic competition where you're not sure what's going to happen, you can't have the same constant, draws and 20-minute matches and 30-minute matches. You have to throw in some of these short matches just to show people this can happen.
And again, we move ahead to January the 30th, 10,480 fans out to see Thesz defeat Bill Longson by disqualification. They get about 24 minutes. The longest match on the card, though, is the 2 out of 3 fall midget match. So we're going to shout out to Little Beaver and Jim Corbett over Fuzzy Cupid and Mighty Schultz here. They go about 28 minutes here of a midget match. So a little bit of everything, like we said here, going back to St. Louis. And hopefully the little guys got paid pretty well here for that draw.
Yeah, I see they had their the midget wrangler was on the card too, Jack Britton.
Yes,
Carol Krauser. So they must have came through as a kind of a package deal.
A little package deal, to quote Mean Gene there. Yeah, so we're going to move ahead. We're going to go into the month of February now and see what they do here in February. World champion back again, Thesz. He defeated Hans Hermann back at the end of 1952, and here he is again, this time defeating German Hans Schmidt. So Thesz not only fighting the Kaiser in World War II, legit, but here he is beating him here in the pro wrestling ranks as well.
Yeah, again, another kind of a short match for the main event championship match. Especially with Hans Schmidt. Hans could actually work. He could actually go in the ring. He was pretty entertaining.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talk about gimmicks and the next man up. Perhaps I can't say for certain. We don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. But the Great Zora has arrived. Who will also, we'll talk about more of the Great Zora in a moment. But he's on this card here in February as well in a handicap match, defeating both Tarzan White and Fred Davis by countout. Now, that match going to go about 30 minutes, but Great Zora, another guy they're beginning to build up.
Yeah, and that's a relatively quick handicap match, 25 minutes to get rid of both falls. That's a good push.
Yeah, and he's going to continue that push here. February the 20th, we're going to see Zora defeat Whipper Watson on a disqualification, and Bill Longson in the main event over Barney Bernard.
Barney, before he became Chesty. Again, that's you see a lot of a very short main event there. 7 minutes and 48 seconds for Bill Longson and Barney Bernard. But again, maybe trying to get Bill Longson some of his heat back after the disqualification loss against Thesz.
Well, I have another note here from Phil Adams himself here in my notes. On February 27th, a card was expected to sell out the Kiel. Well, that's easy to say when you don't run the card. Sure. But it had to be canceled because of a dispute between, you have here the Electricians Union and the Stagehand Union. The electricians refused to throw the light switch. I mean, that's the thing, guys. Refunds or exchanges for the show were rescheduled for the later date of March the 13th. They were offered. So main event was supposed to be Hans Schmidt in a handicap match. Somehow that was going to sell out the arena. Who am I to doubt Hans Schmidt?
Exactly. I guess there's a kind of like a turf war between the electricians and the Stagehand Union. The Stagehand Union, up until this point, had been in charge of throwing the light switch on in order to start the show. That was their job. The electricians decided this was something that they needed to do, and so they refused to run electricity into the building.
Wow.
Unless they were the ones who were allowed to turn the lights on. And in fact, they had sabotaged, damaged some of the electrical units there in order to make sure the show wasn't going to happen. There were two more events scheduled. One the next day was a college basketball game, and then there was an event scheduled the next day after that. Both of those ended up going off without a hitch. They were able to settle their little turf war, but yeah, the people interviewed in the paper that showed up for the matches were pissed off.
I would imagine so.
They had talked to a couple of people who had driven 100 miles, which is, at that time, driving 100 miles for a wrestling match is an amazing commitment. They had gotten the word around 6 or 7 o'clock that night. The show's supposed to start at 8:30. They'd gotten word around 6 or 7 o'clock that this was going to happen, and they tried to, through radio and what other means, to let people know that this was going to happen. But they said approximately 6,000 people showed up expecting to get in. Wow. And they were very unhappy.
That's bad business, too. I mean, not that it's Sam's fault, but that's bad business for the pro wrestling company. Because even if it has nothing to do with Sam, a lot of fans are going to blame Sam, that damn wrestling. I'm not going to give them my money again. So, well,
at least at this point, Sam had built up enough goodwill with the people for not, there had not been any problems with cards in the past. There were no shows or anything like that. So probably people were more willing to accept the explanation. And I think there was no question of why this happened. So I think Sam got off pretty much unscathed. And they I think this was actually a Martin Thesz show, so to speak. And Martin was quoted in the paper as giving all the parameters for how exchanges were to occur and all that kind of stuff.
Okay. Very, very good. All right. Well, I love the extra insight into that whole thing. Clearly, there was at least 4 figures on the line for these guys to fight over throwing a damn light switch here to get the show running. But they figured it out. I'm glad to hear they figured it out by the time it was college basketball time anyway.
Yeah.
We're going to move ahead, though. So while they rescheduled an event for March the 13th, they actually have another show on the 6th of March at the arena for what Sam called the best card of the year, featuring a rematch with Lou Thesz and Bill Longson. Now, the first one drew 10,480, if I remember correctly. This one, diminishing returns kind of rule here, 68.53.
Yeah, and that's also at the arena. So we're looking at the 20,000 seat venue as opposed to the Kiel. So they go from selling out the Kiel to drawing 35%.
Do you think that was the idea here, though? Let's go to the bigger arena. We can draw even more. We cut ourselves off.
I'm thinking they must have thought because prior to this date, Sam was really talking this card up as the biggest card of the year. I think they really thought they were building going to build on a huge crowd from the previous Longson and Thesz match that didn't have a real ending, just a disqualification ending. So they thought they had something built up. Apparently they didn't.
Well, if you build it, they will come. Unfortunately, only 70% of the original crowd returns, we have to imagine here, for the arena show and the rematch between Thesz and Longson March the 6th. Now, we talked about it. The February 27th show canceled due to the union issues. And so March the 13th, they will return. And you're right. You called it here. Sam said that it would have been a sellout. Maybe it would have, because 92.85 for the handicap match with Hans Schmidt versus Kowalski and Bill Melby. Now, over 9,200 fans come out for this one.
Yeah, that's I don't understand it myself.
No,
it doesn't really make that much sense to me. But is
it the idea of Schmidt and Kowalski? I mean, I don't really understand.
Perhaps. Bill Melby certainly wasn't a big drawing card in St. Louis.
Right.
So maybe the thought of Schmidt and Kowalski. I thought maybe they had seen that they had tagged together previously. I'm not positive. Maybe I just am dreaming that. But something about that matchup really got the people enthralled.
Sometimes you just want to see two big men smack meat, I suppose. And but Hans Schmidt, unlike Hans Hermann before him, becoming a full-fledged super heel attraction. He's hanging around a little longer. And really a turning point in the territory, because as you pointed out, Hans Schmidt could actually go in the ring. He wasn't exactly Thesz or Gagne, but he could work for his gimmick, and he's going to come in, defeat guys like Sonny Myers, but eventually here, much like Hans Hermann, we saw he challenges Lou Thesz for the NWA World title. So St. Louis very good at building up characters for the world title matches, the main event matches, the big blow-offs, if you will. But the ones that are talented seem to hang around after the fact as well.
Yeah, and Hans could actually go, and he was pretty well regarded, I think, as a guy who would do business and would show up and not cause problems and just generally be a good hand. Hans Schmidt was one of the first wrestlers I ever saw on TV back in the very early 70s too. So he had been around for a long time.
He'd figured out his gimmick by that point.
Yeah, he wasn't so much of a worker back then.
No, I've seen some 70s footage of Hans. He's just doing the best he can, baby. But here he defeats Bill Melby and goes on also to defeat Kowalski in the same night. So remember that exhaustion booking angle we've covered time and time again here in the past, guys? Well, Hans, in my recollection, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, Phil. You're welcome to do so. But to my recollection, he's the first guy to go against it, beating both opponents, I believe by pinfall here, as far as my notes are concerned. And one of them, Kowalski, a very protected individual in this particular territory.
Yeah, this is a huge statement win for Hans Schmidt. And clearly they are telling the fans that Hans Schmidt is somebody to be taken very, very seriously.
Well, you talked about it, and we look at the numbers. 92.85 for a rescheduled show is pretty damn good business to begin with. But you got to remember, there's no Thesz on this card. There's no big major backstory angle for revenge here that I can see. So a non-title attraction drawing 9,200 fans, somebody's doing something right. That tells you Hans Schmidt, and credit to Kowalski as well, but Schmidt is becoming a true box office, I wrote phenomenon, maybe not the right word, but for a heel to draw like that, that's a pretty big deal. Yeah,
and I guess in some respects, it was kind of a heel versus heel matchup too, isn't it?
Yeah. I think
which is strange for the time, and maybe that was part of the appeal.
Maybe Kowalski didn't like Schmidt coming in and infringing on his gimmick as far as I'm the top bad guy here. I'm the guy that hangs around and does the 60-minute matches and etc. But importantly, though, the promotion clearly trusting these matches financially. I mean, to put this as your main event, one of these handicap matches, as they call them, you cancel the show and you still bring it back and you damn near sell out. That's a huge statement. I thought Sam was just bullshitting before, or the Mississippi Valley guys, or whatever you want to call it. I thought they were just kind of, we were going to sell out, but the show couldn't happen. So, and maybe they were, who knows? And maybe that's what helped draw it here. I don't really know, but 9,200 is nothing to sneeze at here.
No, and I think they were legitimately expecting that sellout the first time around, based upon what I read in the paper. I think just the fact that so many people had showed up thinking that there was going to be wrestling that night kind of indicated that there was going to be a huge crowd, and turned out to be.
I saw a blurb about a Thesz Schmidt match that would have had to have happened around this time, so I'm going to pretend it was this particular match that Schmidt had with Thesz. And now, granted, Thesz goes over. He beats Hans Schmidt, I think it was like 13, 14 minutes. But Hans becomes the first gimmick heel here to give Thesz a true run for his money, it feels like, as far as the build-up and what it's been quite a while since Thesz has undergone such a serious challenger, I feel like. Even Longson, they draw well, but Bill's more of, it's just technical competition. As Larry Zbyszko used to say, it only takes 3 seconds to win a match. He said it a little more glorious than I, but it's possible. The potential's there. Longson could be champion. He's been a wrestler for a long time. We know he has the capability, but Hans Schmidt looks like a threat, and that's a very different thing than a capable challenger.
Right, and Hans Schmidt is relatively new, too, and that's got to add a lot to the appeal.
Yeah, absolutely. The curiosity and what could be with this guy. What do we really have here? This guy, who knows? And the sky's the limit right now for Hans Schmidt. Before it had been the Ganyas and the Manigovs and the Longsons, though. But that was, again, basic wrestling. This guy had a different style altogether. And so Luke, I guess fans valued that Luke could be in trouble here. The world title, there could be a shift here. But Bill Longson, even here, moving in, now we're heading to the spring of 1953, still hanging on. Drawn 10,000 with Thesz on January the 30th. They do a rematch March the 6th. We talked about that, drawing 6,800, despite Sam calling it card of the year. So he was expecting a little more expectation there. It's kind of funny, though, that you get the world title match rematch and it does less than this handicap match here with Hans Schmidt. But we're going to keep an eye on everybody and see the ebbs and flows here, because we know there's only so many months before we go away again here for the summer. Or do we? Well, we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. We call it a fad, but the crowd beginning to prefer, I feel like, based on this drawing, and I could be wrong, you think they're liking spectacle over the prestige of pro wrestling? I mean, the technical side?
I think they're liking the action. I think the action. That's good. I think they're liking to see the faster pace action in the ring, as opposed to grabbing a hold and working a hold and all that kind of stuff. It's just a different style, and I think it's grabbing people's attention.
It's kind of like today, I hate to compare it to today, but, everybody today wants to see like you said, action. It has a different meaning today than it did even 10, 20, 30 years ago when I was watching the business evolve in the 80s and 90s. But for the 1950s and TV especially, but this was honestly, when you look back at it, a huge cultural shift from, like you said, grabbing a hold, work the hold, escape the hold, get back to the hold. And now it's kicking and punching, and the heels getting to do a little more with their gimmicks and the biting and all these other things. But also it's time to develop high spots. How do we get the crowd to pop? How do we get the crowd to laugh? Especially for the TV audience. So it's just this is probably the first monster shift in the way pro wrestling would develop moving forward.
Yeah, these damn kids are just ruining the business.
Damn fool kids. Rock and roll and this wrestling shit on the TV. What are we going to do with these damn fool kids of the 1950s, man? Well, fans increasingly wanting the spectacle with their wrestling. In my opinion, pro wrestling is visibly evolving into the television age, I guess we can call it, including another gimmick of the great Zora. We've mentioned him. He'll go on to be, I believe, Hans Mortier was the great Zora. Yep. That'll be later on in the 1960s, but we're going to see Zora come in, and just based on some of his early matches, he's getting wins in handicap matches. We talked about that. DQ finishes. Anytime he loses early on, Zora's only losing by DQ, no pinfalls. So we're protecting this gimmick, next man up kind of deal. He's been getting some 1-minute squash wins. Again, that was not a thing until recently here in St. Louis, these 1-minute squashes. So, and then Zora going to be factored into a program with another legendary figure, Whipper Watson.
Yeah, it's kind of like a B-level program in a way. Just one step under the top program.
And as in a Watson, not necessarily in that Chief J role we talked about Longson in, but Watson's certainly a credible name to, if they so desire, push Zora to a match with Thesz moving forward.
Watson at this time is obviously right around world champion level.
Oh, that is 100% true. Whipper Billy Watson was a huge name in the world of pro wrestling. So if you were bringing him in, you were using him, you were going to use him, like you said, near the top. That B, man, that semi-main event, a lot of people will call it in today's world. So Whipper Watson.
And there's always that close relationship with the Tunnies in Toronto and Sam.
Yeah. He was huge. Obviously, he was huge wherever he went, but he was definitely big up there in the Maple Leaf Garden area, was Whipper Watson. So. And he had a hell of a look for that era as well, did the Whipper.
Yeah, he was interestingly, he was a pretty well put together guy. When I was a kid, again, he was part of the attraction for Maple Leaf Wrestling up in Toronto. He was, but he was in a wheelchair at that point, having undergone an accident, and but he was huge with. Children's charities up there, and just a very, very beloved citizen in the Toronto area.
Well, I sit here and I think about how we've seen Bill Longson draw some money here earlier in the year with Thesz, because Longson himself, a former world champion, if you're reading the lineage and whatnot. So he's had his matches with Thesz in the past. Now that's been several years ago. They're a little older and long in the tooth is Bill Longson by this point, but he's still very believable. The credibility is there. Yeah, so Watson was already certainly established world championship level name, and now we're putting Zora in there with him, putting Zora over Watson as well. Another special attraction, I mentioned his name a little bit ago, was Carol, or some people call him Carl Krauser. Also becomes one of the territory's ultimate utility workers. I see Krauser everywhere on the card, everything from the opener to the semi-main, tag team matches, single matches. He's undercard, he's mid-card, he's technical, he's a heel, he's whatever they needed. It felt like Krauser was kind of brought in as that utility player on the card right now.
Yeah, he would go on to become a Kalmykov brother.
One of the Kalmykovs.
working out in the West Coast. Also, a silly piece of trivia about Carol Krauser is he was the model for the original Superman animation and in the comic books. He went down to Fleischer Studios in Florida, and they took pictures of him because he had the incredible body. He was known for being able to roll his abdominal muscles. But they used him as the original model for the animation for Superman in the comic books.
The original visual Superman.
And was also married to a female wrestler. What was her name? I had to write it down because it was a strange name. Zoska Ruska, or something to that effect.
Sure, why not? I'll take your word for it.
She was a Jack Pfeffer female wrestler.
Pfeffer. Okay, very good. It's always good to mention Pfeffer here. That name just rolls right off the tongue. We're going to continue on March the 27th, 53. Thesz versus Gagne. Match goes 50 minutes. So there we go. Now we're getting into the good stuff here. March of 53, moving into, head the springtime here. And we're going to see, we know we won't be long for business, unfortunately. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But wow, headliner, what a way to go out here. Thesz and Gagne on top.
Yeah, and they went the almost the distance. That must have been a hell of a match.
Thesz going over here. Gagne just can't seem to get the best of Thesz, and that's going to lead to some problems here later in the 1950s, moving into the new decade of the 60s. We'll get there when we get there, but just an interesting card top to bottom. Baron Leone on the show as well. Bill Longson, the Midgets are back. Joe Dusick drawing with Krauser. So it's a fun little card there, and I don't have numbers for this particular event, unfortunately, Thesz and Gagne for March the 27th, but let's look, move ahead to April the 9th. So we had Thesz and Gagne. We're up here. We got to take it down a little bit, but how far down are we going? Because look what they drew, 9,200 in the handicap match of sorts. Here on April the 9th, it's Kowalski versus Hans Schmidt 1-on-1. And it's going to be Kowalski going over by disqualification here.
It's still not. They really didn't settle anything, did they? With the disqualification.
Curious to see if they bring it back in the fall, or if both guys are going to be here when we get back in the fall. That's the unfortunate part. You never know what's going to happen over the summer months. If these guys will be back, if they won't. So, going to leave us hanging. But that wasn't the intentions initially, according to you.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say we don't necessarily know that they may have been intending to bring this match back in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, you have your, these are, again, Phil's notes in front of me now. The end of the season happened earlier than expected. Here, April the 9th marked the final show until the fall season. Sam Muchnick gave up his dates for April the 17th and May the 1st. And imagine this, the Mississippi Valley also gave up their dates, April the 24th, in order to allow the original, as you put it, the original superstar, Billy Graham. That's for those of you who I was very confused as a kid in the 1980s. I'll put it that way. Yeah, I thought he was a wrestler.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Wait a second. Didn't this guy he beat up Bruno? Now he's doing this? That's weird.
So we have a superstar, Billy Graham, the evangelical one, to set up shop here in the Kiel Auditorium for a full month. Boy, what kind of money was that guy raking in? And it's Carney recognizing Carney all day long.
Yeah, it was that's interesting. That used to be the model for those guys. They would go, the bigger ones would go and just set up shop for a month or for a few weeks in a city, and just have these have the revivals every day. And
what a racket!
Printing money.
Oh my goodness! And so the Reverend Billy Graham. It's a very interesting note here because it shows wrestlers and promoters, they're practical businessmen first. Arena scheduling, the politics, everything mattered.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure that the folks that ran the Kiel at the time came to Sam and told him, "We have this wonderful opportunity,
the anointed one,
somebody who's going to pay us to be in the building for 30 days. Yeah, would you mind giving up your 3 dates?" So we can make this money.
You don't want to piss the building owners off.
No, and it's just I'm sure. I'm not sure, but I'm assuming that there was probably some sort of financial remuneration made towards to defray some of the costs that Sam may have already incurred to promote these shows. Sure.
They passed the plate Sam's way as well.
Right. But it's just smart business.
No, it absolutely is. So they were only planning for a couple more shows here in the season, and so why not take the time off? Like you said, I'm sure there was some sort of reimbursement or maybe a little deal worked out on the side. But the wrestling business, just like any other business, operating very much, it's kind of that showbiz ecosystem that you're involved in. He's selling God and we're selling Rasslin, but we're all selling something. That's a really important political business insight is, I get it. I get it. It's business first. It's not just, hey, but what about my wrestling program? It's like, I get it. If I were running that building, if I owned that building, I'd be doing the same damn thing.
Yeah, exactly. Again, it's just smart business for the man to defer to a larger show.
So you have here in your notes, it's announced that Harry Willis will run weekly 3 or 4 match cards in East St. Louis starting April the 23rd, very wisely, as Sam Muchnick goes away for a few months. Harry Willis is going to step in. It's not announced, but Sam is supposed to supply the talent for Mr. Willis here. This will come up in a couple years you have in your notes. Do you want to touch anything about Harry Willis or this story?
Yeah, what happens is Harry Willis is a promoter who's going to run over in East St. Louis, just across the river. East St. Louis back at that time was a thriving suburb of St. Louis. He was also going to run some shows over in other small towns in Illinois as well. Of course, it wasn't announced at the time, but Sam was to supply all the talent, and Harry ran a couple of shows with some pretty high level talent. They drew pretty well, but then the talent started. Wasn't the level of talent being supplied wasn't as great as it was for whatever reason, and
kind of like Global.
Kind of, yeah. And so Harry runs for a while, but ends up not doing well because the talent isn't very good, and eventually sues Sam for antitrust violations in a few years, but not much comes of it.
Lawsuits in wrestling, man. Who'd have thunk it? Is May the 4th, it's announced that a brand new venture under the guidance of Sam Muchnick, but with the cooperation of the Mississippi Valley Sports Club, how kind, it's going to begin May the 9th at the St. Louis House Auditorium. And this is going to mark the first television wrestling that will emanate from St. Louis. The show will occur weekly and be broadcasted live on KSD Channel 5, sponsored by Stag Beer. And it's going to air from 9:30 to 11 p.m. each Saturday night. This is going to replace Wrestling from the Marigold on that same station. So here it is, guys. Everybody thought that the old napkin deal was the first time Sam tried running wrestling on TV, but it happens right here in 1953.
Yep. Sam decides that TV wrestling is something that is helping the promotions, especially in Chicago, he feels.
Yeah.
And he thinks that this would be a great way to start promoting his own shows and have people show up for his Keel shows.
So you have here in your notes that the St. Louis House, the auditorium there, held about 1,200 fans for the TV. These shows will run weekly for the next almost 2 years. I think you have here that they run about 102 straight weeks, so no days off apparently here. Even running shows on Christmas and New Year's.
Yeah, they did. They were every Saturday night. They did not take a break, and they didn't put on reruns on Christmas or New Year's Day. They just plowed ahead with their shows.
So a new corporation is invented called Samar. I see the Sam in there. I'm not sure what the AR is for, but maybe I'm reading too much into it.
I'm thinking Sam Martin.
Very good. Very good. Samar. I see how they did that. It's kind of like those today's Hollywood couples. They just kind of threw the two names.
Exactly.
So TV wrestling in St. Louis is formed right here in 1953. We were taught it would happen later, but it happens first here in 1953. Other than the weekly shows, neither entity, Sam Muchnick nor the Mississippi Valley crew, will run from April the 9th all the way through October 9th. So they're going to take some time off from the Keel and other big events like that. Now, I did a little write-up here in regards to my research, and it's very much in line with yours because I think we both use the same fellow, Mr. Tim Hornbaker, for a lot of our information. in regards to the TV here. So I'm going to run through what I wrote, and then I'm going to scroll back up if we have time, and we're going to go into the little breakdown here of the finances in regards to running the TV program. So my research, 1953 TV, basically used the same sources as you did. So a lot of what we know about the birth of wrestling on TV in St. Louis comes from thanks to the digging, the deep diving of legendary wrestling historian, researcher Tim Hornbaker. Great books. Go check out anything Tim's put out, guys. But on April 9th, 1953, promoter Muchnick sent a letter to George Burback, the general manager of KSD-TV, pitching the idea of bringing wrestling to local TV. Interestingly, Sam wasn't a fan of studio wrestling. He felt that if wrestling was going to work, it needed to feature bigger name wrestlers and presented in front of several thousand fans, not a few hundred tops squeezed into a TV studio. Muchnick put together a detailed budget and estimated it would cost about $2,800 a week in 1953 money just to run the show. Now that included arena rent, staffing, talents, officials, publicity, ticket printing. Wrestlers' pay alone was projected at about $1,500 per week, and that didn't even include top-tier talent. So on top of that, Sam was spending heavily on promotion. He maintained a mailing list, as we know, of over 10,000 fans. Got to keep the mailing list going, guys. And an estimated another $540 a week for postage, printing. And Sam knew all about the postage and printing deal and things. He had been around that type of business for a long time, but basically preparing promotional mailers here to get the word out there. Altogether, the weekly cost of operating both the TV show and the advertising campaign came to roughly $3,370. That's a lot of money, even in 1953 money.
Well, yeah. I mean, would we figure out it was roughly a factor of 8 or 9 times what would for today's dollar? So we're talking almost $30,000 a week for production costs, basically.
Yeah, it's crazy, but that's the pitch here that Sam makes. At the time, the only wrestling television available in St. Louis at that point was Fred Kohler's Chicago show, which also aired Saturday nights. So on May the 4th, 1953, Muchnick wrote to Kohler up in Chicago, informing him that, hey, Fred, St. Louis would soon, we're going to have our own Saturday night wrestling show. Sam had hoped the two programs would create competitive interest and even suggested there was no reason why they couldn't share talent. Well, that makes sense. I mean, Chicago's the big league, so why not? Hey, I got an idea. Why don't we share talent?
That's right.
That's the ticket. St. Louis TV Wrestling officially debuts May the 9th, sponsored by Stag Beer. That sponsorship was absolutely vital because it covered the TV time and the announcers and the production costs. In fact, even a sold-out show at the St. Louis House wasn't enough by itself for Muchnick to make the numbers work on his own. So that's a scary thought. I mean, like, we could sell out here and we still wouldn't, cover all our costs. We definitely need sponsors and things of that nature.
Yeah, well, basically we're talking about a $3,300 nut we have to make every week. If the ticket prices at that time were averaging just slightly over $1. So even if you sell out your 1,200 people, you're talking about a gate of only maybe $1,500 tops. So there's a pretty big gap that needs to be made up if you're going to make this a going concern.
Well, eventually, like many sponsors, Stag Beer going to pull out of its sponsorship here with St. Louis Wrestling on TV. And subsequently, not too long after that, the TV program becomes too expensive to continue. They can't afford to keep it afloat, and clearly no other sponsor. Only Stag Beer this entire time, from what I could find. And St. Louis Wrestling disappears from the TV screen for the time being.
Yeah, when Stag pulled out, they immediately lost their television. Now, I guess when they originally came on the air, they were going for an hour and a half. They would start at 9:30 and go to 11 o'clock on Saturday nights. We'll find out sometime about halfway through the run. They get cut a half hour, get moved to 10 o'clock. So maybe perhaps they're not drawing as well. I'm not exactly sure what that change was involved in, but it didn't defer any costs at all because you still had to put on the exact same amount of costs to run your show. So they may have even cut down a little bit on the sponsorship when that happened too, but they could not make it work without sponsorship at all.
No, unfortunately, that's evident. It's unfortunate they couldn't go out and find even a secondary sponsor. It just wasn't meant to be. But from May to December of 1953, they're going to run 34 shows in the St. Louis house there for the TV programming. And things are going to be a little different. But it's like Sam said, we put in the notes there, is that Sam knew he had to have bigger draws, bigger talent on some of the TV programs. So we're going to talk about a lot of the guys that came through there. But there's also other guys that weren't really getting a fair shake as far as the house show, the Keel shows and things like that. They're beginning to be pushed for, I guess you could call TV talent, where it's kind of a different world here in the television world. Kay Bell, one of them, headlining much of the summer events on TV. It's almost like the summertime show headliner here for television was Kay Bell. But the names here in 1953, eerily, it's kind of scary, mimic many of the talents in Georgia. Just a year or two later, they're here in St. Louis first, but all of these names going to pop up in Georgia within the next year or two. And I'm talking about Bill McDaniel, who's going to be Billy Blassie, Tarzan White, Fred Blassie, still local to St. Louis right now, Chief Bigheart, Farmer Jones, Dano O'Shaker, and Red McIntyre, who is the brother of Don McIntyre, who is a legendary main event figure there in the Georgia territory. So we've got a lot of new names popping up for the TV scene.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting that they're bringing in they're kind of smaller names, I guess, because they're not running the big shows at the Keel, so they can't they can't piggyback television shows with house shows, and so they probably, in order to cut down on the cost and to make this thing viable, they're bringing in some of the smaller names.
And in between, we can afford to splurge, so to speak. So we get commodities like Kowalski on the program from time to time, Bill Longson, Krauser, Roy McClarity, Chief Don Eagle, Hardboiled Haggerty, Pat O'Connor, Johnny Valentine. So the hits do come, even if some of them were a little all over the place with their pushes right now in the world. Some have already reached stardom, some are on their way. But so it's fun to see some of the guys that just kind of pop up here from time to time on the television screen.
Yeah, and these shows were basically they started at 8:30. Television portion would start at 9:30, and then you go till 11 o'clock. So they would put the main event of each show would be on television.
Another thing that was really fun, if you go back and you look at some of the TV results that are out there, you can see some of the names begin to trickle in that are going to be part of the Keel shows moving into the latter half of the summer. They're getting people prepared for the returns of O'Connor and Longson. The Dusicks are here, Krauser, etc. So a lot of those guys are not in the early TV of May, June, July, but you'll see them in August, September TV, because now we're going to use television for what it's meant for, and that's to kind of hype these guys for the big shows that are coming up at the Keel.
Right, and it just makes sense. I mean, this is the perfect way to use your television. If you're going to have television, you're going to use it to build up your stars and to build up your future shows.
It's amazing how quickly people figured out how to use TV to promote. I mean, in order to promote your house shows. I mean, there's no blueprint until the late 1940s, beginning of the 1950s, and how to handle television. What do we do with this talking picture box in front of us, right? And so they use it wisely. It's like, okay, well, we know we're going to be back at the Keel in a month, so let's start bringing in the guys that are going to be at the Keel in a month. So it's brilliant, really. I mean, I know it sounds like common sense, but for the time, it amazes me how quickly they evolved to the TV era and figured out how to use this thing.
Right. I mean, there's no blueprint for them. They didn't know. There was no tested and true method for how we're supposed to use this TV, and they had to figure it out on the fly, and they did a wonderful job of it.
Well, Sam was tried and true in the technical level of pro wrestling. We will learn later on, but the Mighty Midgets are becoming a fixture here. Buddy Rogers pops through around this time. I mentioned Chief Don Eagle caught my eye, but TV also introducing more gimmicky stars and foreign stars. Ali Pasha, we got Farmer Jones, Tarzan White, the Great Humphrey. Not to be confused with Happy Humphrey, but the Great Humphrey was his own interesting thing. And Ricky Starr, there's another. The first time I saw Ricky Starr, on one of those tapes, you go the old 50s golden age tapes they sold in the stores for like $5, and I picked it up and I said, man, this guy's awesome. You got to love the shtick of Ricky Starr. Definitely an acquired taste, the ballet type maneuvers in the ring, but a little bit of everything. Again, we're going back and great showcasing for TV.
Yeah, Ricky Starr was a really interesting because he was totally different, and that really worked back then. Also, very, very loyal to Jack Pfeffer.
Yeah, there's a few names in this list here. Great Humphrey, things like that were Pfeffer friends, I do believe. But May the 20th, 1953, on TV, we get NWA World Heavyweight Champion Lou Thesz. You remember when I said splurge? It's Thesz bringing back an old familiar foe from the latter part of 1952. Thesz over Hans Herman here on the television screen in the summer of 53, or heading into the summer of 53.
Yeah, they figured they could give away this match on TV because they had already run it at the
6 months ago. Yeah.
Right.
We haven't seen Herman really on the roster in quite a while either, so it's almost like they brought him back specifically because they needed a foil for Lou Thesz, a familiar foil, and it worked 6 months ago to some degree, and so they bring it back here for television. June 20th, hallelujah, it's a miracle. Chris Zaharias is back in the wrestling ring, back on TV now. Is Zaharias from that terrible injury he suffered when the car flipped over a few months ago. His lawsuit had alleged he wouldn't be able to wrestle again, but here we are.
It wasn't miraculous. perhaps he stopped by that the Billy Graham revival.
I wonder
a few months ago.
I wonder if he was part of that Lloyds of London gimmick there. Those guys really love the Lloyds of London.
Probably a little before that time.
Insurance companies are pretty smart, but whoever was working there at the Lloyds and said, it's pro wrestling, it's not real, they're not going to get hurt. Boy, did they get screwed.
Yeah, I bet somebody lost a job there.
Mm-hmm. Well, the TV stars are made now. We're in the television era, so we are seeing stars being made before our eyes, and these are guys that would have not probably gotten this notoriety had it just been the house show, man. The Keel shows or things of that nature. Like I mentioned, Kay Bell, one of the biggest quiet success stories of St. Louis TV. If you follow the results over the summer of 1953, he is heavily factored in, but also Dave Sims, Chris Zaharias, Stu Gibson, Tom Bradley. These are not names we mention a lot, but they're utilized quite a bit as serious TV talent, if you will.
Yeah, they were all used a lot. Kay Bell, a former football player, that was his kind of hook, I guess. But all those guys are, a little bit lesser known talent, but used on TV to be built up. They're probably trying to make a new star out of one of these guys.
Well, we even get a couple of outdoor shows run here, held at Lake Hill Speedway in Valley Park on June the 12th and June 26th. Now, I don't believe Sam was running shows here. So was this a different person coming in to promote?
Yeah, they never gave a name of who the promoter was, just where the matches were occurring. They didn't even. I couldn't find a good list of what the matches were either. But they only had a couple of times those 2 dates in June. The Lake Hill Speedway was at one point in the area was kind of a big deal. It's where if there are NASCAR fans out there, it's where Rusty Wallace and Kenny Wallace kind of cut their teeth, and Kenny Schrader as well. But supposedly the wrestling only lasted a couple of weeks there because, it's outdoors, and Valley Park is located right next to at that point, a relatively slow-moving river, and there was a mosquito issue that was just unbearable, supposedly, and that's why wrestling was stopped being presented there.
Understood. Yeah, that could be an issue, certainly. So we move ahead to July. A new TV station, Channel 36, announces they'll begin showing Wrestling from the Marigold. It's back from Chicago. They're not just going to air it. They're going to air it at the same time as Sam's show airs. And you wrote in your notes, I see a new podcast, the Saturday Night War. Please, Phil, don't give me another show to do right now.
I think it would be perfect for you and John Paz. You could get the tapes from those shows. Kind of you compare the ratings
side by side. Yeah.
See who was moving the numbers back then. But the Marigold show was what Sam's show had replaced, and so this new Channel 36 was out of Belleville, Illinois. A town just across the river, but was constructed, and they became part of like an associate of the Dumont Network, and started showing some of their programming.
Well, that's unfortunate for Sam. You talk about competition of the same type. That's the worst kind. And by the latter half of the summer, though, we're going to continue to see stars continue to develop on TV, including Roy McClarity He's here. He gets a major push on TV anyway, draws with Bill Longson, draws with Jim White, loses to Kowalski, but then he comes back with a vengeance, wins over Tarzan White, the Great Zora by DQ, and Frank Marconi. So Roy McClarty, another very famous name from this era, so it's cool to see him being utilized, at least on the TV era, TV season, if you will.
Yeah, and you can see how they slot him in. He's basically kind of an upper mid-carder because he draws with a couple of the upper mid-carders, Bill Longson and Jim Wright, but he defeats the lower card guys, but loses to the upper card guy.
Right. Well, we have a few examples here of TV main events as we return to the Keel. We talked about a kind of a change in the TV, a shift to kind of build towards some of the Keel shows. And it gets no bigger than this one. October the 3rd on television, NWA World Champion Thesz going to a 30-minute time limit draw with Ray Eckert to set up a return match at the Keel on October the 23rd. So Storytelling 101, great utilization of TV, and you get to see a world title match on the TV, and it's going to build to a rematch at the house show. Storytelling 101.
Yep. As basic can be.
Also, St. Louis TV, October the 17th, 2 out of 3 fall matchup. Going to see Guy Brunetti and Joe Tangaro defeat Bill Longson and Jim Wright. Now, that match is going to go 24 minutes, but I noticed here Brunetti and Tangaro are going to be used as a tag team off and on quite a bit here for the next little while. And so, again, utilization of this, putting these guys over 2 out of 3 falls on television to establish them as the team to beat.
Right. And then we see them, in between that, before that, they're winning a 2 out of 3 fall match at the Keel.
And we're going to close up shop here. We're going to return to the Keel here October the 9th, and we're going to set the stage for the big 23rd event, which is the rematch with Thesz and Eckert to kick off the next episode. But we're going to close it out by returning to the Keel Auditorium here October the 9th, the new fall season, if you will, drawing 6,103 fans. The first night, that can't be a very good drawing number, I would think, for the first night back after so many months away.
No, and again, we've had 6 months of television to build up to the show too. So that's, you got to think it's disappointing, but again, it kind of goes with the pattern that we've seen where these fall shows are not really drawing all that great, regardless of who's in them.
No, absolutely. And again, I'm very curious to know what the reasoning or the thought process for the reasoning is, but the card very, very solid. We get a 2 out of 3 fall match again, Brunetti and Tangaro getting another win, Jim Wright and Vincent Lopez, the opponents there. Ray Eckert, who had just come off the draw with Thesz on TV, he defeats Roy McClarty, who had been a darling on the television for weeks now, if not for the last few months. So that's a big get for Eckert to score a victory like that before his rematch with Thesz.
Right, and we had built Roy McClarty up as a very good opponent, as somebody who, if you get a win over him, you've got a win over somebody. And again, just basic of how we're building cards.
Paul Balarjian defeating the Great Zora by DQ. So I was a little surprised at that finish, but I guess Zora cannot be trusted in the ring. Is the story we're telling there? That guy can do anything.
Yeah, you never know what he's going to pull. Never
know what he's up to. So this might have something to do with the 6,100 fans, kind of a lackluster, what I'd call it is the main event, the feature match of Władek Kowalski, the future killer Kowalski, defeating Mighty Atlas. So it's kind of a showman match, really, there with the gimmicks involved. Mighty Atlas, and then, of course, Kowalski, the monster.
Yeah, and you look at the card as a whole, it's a solid card, but it's not like a great card. And you can kind of see why it kind of draws a middling number.
Yeah, and it's really one of these cards where I look at it and I go, okay, great card, but where's the main event? Like, the main event feels like a semi-main, really, and that's kind of where it's at. And I think that really probably played into this particular number of 6,100 fans as well, as it being the early fall for Sam. But we're going to see what happens if they turn the tide and what goes on for the remainder of 1953 into the new year of 54 and beyond as we continue to tell the story of the St. Louis Wrestling Club and the St. Louis Wrestling History Project right here on Regional Rasslin Presents and, of course, the Regional Rasslin Podcast. Now, another fun time out, man. Is there any big takeaway here for you that really stuck out to you here in the 52-53 timeframe we covered today?
Well, I think it's kind of, in some respects, it's kind of a transition period where we're kind of a transition from the older, slower style to a kind of a more upbeat, more action, shorter matches, kind of a get in, get out sort of thing. it's kind of reflecting societal changes, I guess, in many respects. Yeah. But again, we also see that the fall season is not drawing as well, and it's interesting that the TV experiment, so to speak, the 6 months of TV that we've had through the summer hasn't really bumped up the attendance at all.
Right. Well, I have to believe that rock and roll and the invention of TV ruined this country. Unfortunately, no. It's hopefully everybody enjoyed their recent celebration of 250 years of being here on this continent as the United States of America. But no, in all seriousness, guys, it was another fun trip back in time. I love all the notes that you throw at me, Phil. It really helps complement mine, which were minuscule when we originally were going to tackle this project, try to get to the actual TV era, but we're in a different TV era right now, and I'm looking forward to seeing how they use that for the next couple of years while they have it before it goes dormant for a little while, and then it'll be back with a vengeance, guys, by the end of the 1950s. Stay tuned for that. But we're going to wrap it up here this week, guys. I want to thank Phil. I love having you on here, man. It's always a blast talking to you, just sitting down, hanging out, and talking old school wrestling.
Yeah, I really enjoy it. This stuff is so fun to go back and look at, and I'm having a great time with this, Ray. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And guys, for anybody listening on the Regional Rasslin podcast side of things, I have to imagine that the video version dropped it probably a month before you're listening to it here. So that's one incentive to go out and grab that VIP tier over at patreon.com/WrestleCopia. But in all seriousness, I joked a little earlier, you can see me and Phil on the screen, but you get to see notes, and we're going to have pictures and other things coming up. I have prepared for future episodes, slides, notes, some old school videos and things like that. We're going to do all kinds of fun stuff here on the St. Louis Wrestling Project and then Regional Rasslin Presents moving forward. But for this week, we're going to say goodbye. I want to thank you again, Phil, for doing this with me, man. I've been having a blast with you, and I'm looking forward to the end of 1953 and years to come.
Yeah, let's get back on this really quickly so I don't lose my train of thought.
Yeah, I don't want to do that to you or to the fans out there. So we'll be back soon, guys. More Regional Rasslin on the way.